I'm a 26-year-old single father to my daughter, Eva. She's 8 now, but this happened when she was 6, in December of 2022. It was our first Christmas alone together after a pretty rough divorce. I was overcompensating, trying to make everything perfect. Tree, lights, presents, even a stupid ugly Christmas sweater I wore just to make her laugh. We live in a small 2-bedroom house on a quiet street. It's not a bad neighborhood, but it's definitely not fancy either. I work evenings at a restaurant, and most days I'd try to do something Christmas-related with Eva before I left for my shift. One Sunday afternoon, I took her to this holiday fair that popped up in the parking lot of an old shopping center. You know the type. Temporary rides, stalls selling cheap toys, fake snow machines, someone dressed up as the Grinch, and of course, a Santa. The Santa booth was a small setup, an old wooden chair, some LED lights, and a cheap red backdrop. Instead of a pro photographer, there was this young woman with a DSLR camera on a tripod, charging $5 for a printed photo. Eva begged to take a picture with Santa, so I agreed. Santa was tall, skinny, with a fake beard that didn't even fully cover his chin. His costume looked worn out and kind of dirty, but he had that exaggerated, jolly voice. He didn't seem drunk or anything, just off. His eyes were too focused. He asked Eva her name, then repeated it back to her 3 times like he was trying to memorize it. "What do you want for Christmas, Eva?" he asked. She said she wanted a big dollhouse. He laughed and said, "I'll see what I can do, sweetheart." Then he looked at me, and the way his eyes stayed on me a second too long made me uncomfortable. I just brushed it off. After the picture, we waited a few minutes while the woman printed it. She handed us a glossy photo, Eva sitting on Santa's lap, both smiling. We went home, and I stuck the picture on our fridge with a magnet. It felt like a normal, wholesome thing to do. The first weird thing happened that same night. It was around 11 p.m. Eva had been asleep for hours. I was in the living room on the couch, scrolling through my phone with the TV on low. For some reason, I got the urge to grab a snack. I went into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and that's when I noticed the photo. Only Santa was different. In the printed picture, Santa had been looking at the camera, smiling with that goofy expression. But now his eyes were looking directly to the side, toward my daughter. I froze. I stared at it for a solid 10 seconds, trying to figure out if I was misremembering the angle of his eyes. I assumed maybe the angle or the light was tricking me. I actually went to my room and pulled out my wallet because I had the smaller version of the photo there too. When I compared them side by side, my stomach dropped. In the wallet photo, Santa was clearly looking at the camera like I remembered. In the fridge photo, his eyes were turned toward Eva, and his smile looked slightly wider, showing a bit more teeth. I told myself it must be some printing glitch, that the bigger one just looked different. It bothered me, but I let it go. I flipped the fridge photo over so it faced the appliance and went back to watching TV. The next night, I worked a closing shift and didn't get home until just past midnight. My brother had watched Eva at his place and dropped her off earlier in the evening, so she was already asleep. I walked into the quiet house, locked the door behind me, and went to the kitchen to grab a drink. The fridge photo was flipped back over, facing outward again. Santa was now not only staring directly at Eva in the photo, but his head looked slightly tilted toward her, like he was leaning in. The change was subtle, but obvious once you saw it. His eyes looked almost too sharp, like someone had penciled in the pupils darker. I felt a chill race down my spine. I called out, "Ava?" and went to her room. She was sleeping peacefully. I half convinced myself she must have flipped the photo back before bed. Kids doing weird things and all that. Still, I took the picture down and put it in a drawer this time. The following day was a school day for Ava. I dropped her off, came back home to clean a bit before work, and that's when I noticed the envelope. It was slid under our front door, plain white, no stamp, no name, no address. Just an envelope sitting crookedly on the floor mat. I opened it, expecting maybe a flyer or some neighbor's message. Inside was a printed photo. It was the same Santa picture, but zoomed in, cropped tight around my daughter's face. It was printed on regular paper this time, like from a cheap home printer. Across the bottom, in red ink, someone had written, "Such a beautiful girl, Santa." My hands started shaking. I checked the back of the paper, but there was nothing else. I checked through the curtains by the window. The street was empty. I called the holiday fair number listed on their flyer, just some generic event group. When I finally got a hold of someone, they said they never hired the Santa or the photographer directly. It was a local performer and associate who rented the booth space through another contact. They gave me a name, Nick. I swear I thought they were joking. They said his full name was something like Nicholas Landon, but they didn't have his personal number, just an email that kept bouncing back. I went to the police. I showed them the envelope and the photo. They took it seriously enough to file a report, but there wasn't a direct threat, and I didn't have much more than a picture of a guy in a Santa suit. They told me to keep doors locked, call 911 if I saw him again, and not to panic my daughter yet. That night, I didn't work. I stayed home. I put Ava to bed early, told her I was tired, and set up a chair in the hallway between her room and the front door. I turned off all the lights, leaving only the faint glow of the Christmas tree in the living room. I kept my phone in my hand and waited. It was quiet for hours. At around 1 a.m., the heater clicked on, and I remember almost dozing off. Then I heard it, a soft rustling sound at the front of the house. Footsteps on the porch. They were slow, deliberate, almost careful. My heart started pounding. I slid quietly along the hallway floor to the front door and looked through the peephole. At first, all I could see was a blur of red and white. Then the figure stepped back just enough. It was Santa. The same build, same suit, same dull fake beard. But now, without the happy public fair environment, he looked wrong. His hat was slightly tilted, his beard crooked, and his eyes, exposed through the holes of the mask-like beard, looked tired, sunken, and excited all at once. He was holding something in his hand. I squinted, trying to make it out. It was another white envelope. He slowly bent down and placed the envelope on the doormat. Then he didn't leave. He just stood there, facing the door. After a few seconds, he raised his head and stared directly into the peephole. I jerked back instinctively, even though he couldn't really see me. He stayed like that for what felt like a full minute. Then he lifted a gloved hand and slowly dragged one finger across his neck. A throat-cutting gesture. Then he walked out of view. I immediately dialed 911, whispering into the phone that the man from the photos was outside my house. I didn't move until I heard the sirens approaching. When I opened the door with the officer, the porch was empty. Only the envelope was there. Inside was another printed photo. This time it was not from the holiday fair. It was a picture of my house, taken from the sidewalk at night. Eva's bedroom window glowed softly on the second floor. The red writing at the bottom said, "Santa always finds his way in." They searched the area but found nothing. The officers checked my windows and doors. Everything was locked. One of them pointed out faint shoe prints in the light dusting of frost on the sidewalk, heading toward the corner, but they vanished at the street. The police took the photos and the envelopes. After that night, they stepped up patrols around my street for a while. I changed the locks, installed cameras around the house, and got motion-activated lights. Nothing happened for the rest of that winter. The holiday fair packed up and left. I never saw that Santa again. A few months later, in March, a detective called me. They had identified Nick from some other incident. Apparently, he'd been questioned in another town for suspicious behavior around a playground, but was let go because he never physically did anything illegal. They matched the handwriting from my photos to notes found in a storage unit he rented, notes about other kids, scribbled phrases about Christmas magic, and even a few printed photos of random children with their faces circled. He had disappeared. The storage unit was abandoned. His car was later found in another state, but no sign of him. Every Christmas since, my daughter loves sitting by the tree and watching movies. I don't hang any mall or Santa photos in the house anymore. I still have the new security system, and every year around the beginning of December, I scroll through my camera app compulsively, making sure there are no strange figures in red standing on the sidewalk. Because somewhere out there, there is a man who thinks he's Santa, and he knows I have a little girl. This happened 3 years ago when I was 19. I was back in my hometown for Christmas break after my first semester of college. It's a small, kind of depressing town where nothing ever really changes. Same old houses, same old neighbors. Except that year, something new did show up. The house with the blue lights. On my street, people either go all out with decorations or do absolutely nothing. But there's one house at the corner that had always been completely dark every Christmas. No lights, no wreath, nothing. It had been that way for as long as I can remember. The guy who lived there was old, reclusive, and honestly kind of creepy. People called him Mr. Riley, but I barely ever saw him. That December, the house suddenly had decorations for the first time ever. But not normal decorations. The entire front of the house was covered in strings of bright, cold blue LED lights. Around the roof, outlining the windows, wrapped around the bare tree in the yard. It was overkill, almost blinding compared to everyone else's warm yellow lights. What made it eerie was that the blinds to every window were tightly shut. You couldn't see inside at all, but the blue light leaked through the edges, giving it this weird, unnatural glow. At first, everyone on the street was just surprised. People joked that maybe Mr. Riley finally got into the Christmas spirit. But then, someone mentioned that they hadn't actually seen him in months. One night, a couple weeks before Christmas, I was coming home from a late shift at a warehouse job. It was around 1 in the morning. The street was completely quiet, and all the other houses had their Christmas lights turned off for the night, except the blue house. Those blue lights were still on, flickering ever so slightly. As I walked past the house, I swear I heard something, faint cries, like someone sobbing. I stopped on the sidewalk, trying to listen more closely. The cold air made it hard to breathe, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. The sound came again, but this time it was clearer. It was a voice, a woman's voice. "Help! Please!" It was weak, drawn out, like someone who had been crying for a long time. It sounded like it was coming from inside the house. I looked at the windows, but all I could see were the blue lights reflected on the glass and the blinds behind them. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds, listening, and I heard it again. "Please, is anyone there?" I took my phone out to call someone, but then I imagined waking up some old man who had a TV on too loud or something and humiliating myself. I was tired, and part of me thought my brain might be playing tricks on me, mixing sounds from the street or some TV inside the house. I ended up walking home, but I couldn't shake the sound of that voice. 2 nights later, I was driving home instead of walking. As I drove past the blue house, I noticed something new. Taped to the inside of one of the front windows was a piece of paper. It was hard to see from the car, but there was definitely something written on it in huge black letters. I parked in my driveway, then walked back on foot, pretending I was just out for a walk so no one would think anything of it. As I got closer, I could read the words. From the sidewalk, through the blue glow and the glass, the paper clearly said, "Help me." The letters were written in thick, uneven strokes, like someone had used a marker or maybe even painted it. The note was stuck between the glass and the closed blinds, but just enough of it peeked out to be seen. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I pulled out my phone and immediately called 911. I told them there was a house on my street where someone had put up a "Help Me" sign in the window, and that I had heard cries a couple nights earlier. The operator said officers would be dispatched and asked me to stay near my home. I went back to my driveway and waited, watching the blue lights pulse. It took about 10 minutes for the first police car to arrive. 2 officers got out and walked up to the door. I watched them knock, then knock again. No answer. One of them tried the door. It was locked. Within another few minutes, more police and an ambulance showed up. I watched from my porch as they eventually forced the door open. Even from across the street, I could smell something foul drift out of that house, the kind of smell you never forget. I couldn't see much from my vantage point, but I could hear a female officer's voice inside, shouting something like, "We've got someone here." Then more commotion, people rushing in and out. Eventually, a paramedic came out pushing a stretcher. On it was a woman. She looked middle-aged, painfully thin, like skin stretched over bone. Her hair was matted, and her face was bruised. She had a blanket over most of her, but you could see restraints around her wrists, like she'd been tied or cuffed to something before they found her. Her eyes were open, barely, and she kept whispering something, but I couldn't hear what from where I stood. The next stretcher that came out had a black bag on it. I didn't need anyone to tell me what that meant. Over the next few days, rumors tore through the neighborhood. Some were exaggerations, I'm sure, but here's what I later heard directly from an officer I knew from high school and from the local news. The old man, Mr. Riley, had died in that house. Judging by the state of his body, he'd been dead for at least a week or more when they found him. The cause of death was a heart attack. The woman they rescued was his sister. She'd been kept in that house for months, possibly longer. She had injuries consistent with restraints and abuse. Supposedly, she had some mental health issues, which Mr. Riley had taken it upon himself to manage in his own twisted way, rather than getting her proper care. The worst part is how they found her. She had been kept mostly in the back of the house in a room with the windows boarded up. She was only able to write that "Help Me" sign by sneaking out of the room one night while he was passed out, finding some old poster board and marker and taping it to the window before he woke up or caught her. The blue lights? Those had apparently been set on a timer by Riley shortly before he died. The constant bright glow made it harder to see inside, both for neighbors and for anyone who might notice something wrong. Ironically, that same glow made the note visible at night from the street. The woman told the police she'd been yelling for help for days, hoping someone outside would hear her over the TV and the noise from the old radiator. I realized that the night I thought I heard a voice, I really had. I still feel guilty that I didn't call the police that first night. After all of this, the house was sealed off for a while. The blue lights stayed up but turned off, hanging limp across the roof and around the windows like the veins of a dead thing. Months later, the house was put up for sale. The lights were finally taken down, but the hooks and nails remained. A new family moved in last year. They've put up normal, warm-colored decorations, and they seem nice. But every time I drive past that corner and I see Christmas lights on any house now, I can't help but think about how something so cheerful was used to hide something so awful. And I still hear her voice sometimes in the back of my mind. Help, please. This happened last December, in 2024, and it's the reason I hate sleeping in my parents' house now. I'm 23, and at the time I was living in a small apartment in the city. But for Christmas, I always go back to my parents' place in the suburbs. It's the classic family home, 2 floors, a basement, and an attic that no one really uses except for storage. Christmas Eve is a big deal in my family. We do a big dinner, exchange some early gifts, watch Christmas movies, the usual. That year, my sister and her husband came with their 4-year-old son, Liam, who's obsessed with Christmas and especially with Santa. After dinner, we all gathered in the living room. My dad had a fire going in the fireplace. The tree was lit, and Liam kept running to the window trying to see Santa's sleigh. It was actually a really cozy night. Around 11 p.m., my parents went to bed. My sister and her husband took the guest room. I was sleeping in my old childhood bedroom on the 2nd floor, which is right next to the pull-down ladder that leads up to the attic. I stayed up a little later, scrolling on my phone in bed. Eventually, around midnight, I put my phone down and tried to sleep. The house was quiet. I could hear the occasional creak of the old wood, the heater clicking, and faint snoring from the guest room across the hall. At some point, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember is waking up, disoriented, in the dark. Something had woken me up, but I didn't know what. The room was cold. The house felt off. It took me a few seconds to realize what was wrong. The heater wasn't running. The usual background hum was gone. I glanced at my phone. It was 3:14 a.m. As I lay there, trying to decide if I was actually hearing anything, I heard it again. A soft, dragging sound, like something heavy shifting across wood. It came from directly above my room. Above my room is the attic. I held my breath and listened. A few seconds later, there it was again. A slow, scraping drag, followed by a dull thump. The kind of noise you hear when someone moves a box across a rough floor and sets it down. We have old Christmas decorations, boxes of junk, and some furniture up there. It could have been something settling, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. I sat up and quietly got out of bed. The floorboard near my door creaked loudly, and I winced. I opened my door just a crack and looked out into the hallway. Then I heard another sound. A quicker, lighter sequence of steps. Not dragging this time. Footsteps, one after another, moving across the attic floor, passing above my head and heading toward the area near the hallway. I stared at the attic hatch, half expecting it to swing down at any moment. My first instinct was to go wake my dad. But I hesitated, thinking how stupid I'd sound if it turned out to be just the house settling. I decided to at least listen closer before I did anything. I stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding. The air felt colder near the attic hatch. I stood directly underneath it, looking up. The string you pull to open the ladder hung there, perfectly still. Then I heard it. Clear as day. A small, breathy chuckle. It came from the attic, right above me. I froze. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. A human sound. A quick, low, almost playful laugh, like someone enjoying a private joke. I backed away from the hatch, walked straight to my parents' room and knocked on the door. My dad opened it, half asleep, and I whispered, "There's someone in the attic." He looked confused at first, but when he saw how shaken I was, he woke up quickly. He told me to wait in the hallway while he grabbed something from his closet. He came back with a heavy flashlight and, to my surprise, an old metal baseball bat. He whispered, "Don't wake your mom yet," and walked under the attic hatch. He pulled the string and the ladder unfolded with a loud creak. Dust drifted down. We both listened for any reaction. Nothing. He climbed up slowly, shining the flashlight ahead of him. The attic was dark, cold, and smelled like dust and insulation. He disappeared into the opening, shining the light around, muttering to himself. A few tense minutes passed. Then he called down, sounding confused rather than scared. "There's nothing up here, just the usual junk." He came back down, folded the ladder up, and shrugged it off as the house creaking. He teased me a little about being spooked, but I could tell he was at least a little unsettled. He checked the doors and windows downstairs just to be sure. Everything was locked. I tried to go back to sleep, but it took me a long time. At some point, I managed to drift off again. When I woke up, it was morning. Christmas morning. Downstairs, the living room looked like classic chaos. Wrapping paper everywhere, Liam tearing open gifts, my parents making coffee. For a little while, I forgot about the night and just enjoyed being with my family. Until Liam said something that made my blood run cold. He was sitting on the floor, playing with a toy truck he'd just opened. My sister was helping him remove some twist ties from the box. Out of nowhere, he said in that innocent kid voice, "Santa was loud last night." My sister chuckled and said, "You heard Santa? What did he sound like?" Liam replied, "Like walking and dragging and laughing." I looked up from the couch. My sister smiled and said, "Where did you hear that, baby?" Liam pointed. "At the ceiling," he said. "Right over Auntie's room." My stomach dropped. I was about to say something when my dad came in from the kitchen, holding a mug of coffee. He must have heard that last part too, because he shot me a quick look, then immediately said, "Hey, buddy, did you see Santa too, or just hear him?" Liam shook his head. "I saw him too."
Through the hole. We all stared at him. "What hole?" my mom asked. Liam thought for a second, then pointed toward the hallway. "The ceiling hole with the steps. He was looking down from there." My dad and I exchanged a glance. My mom brushed it off as a kid's overactive imagination, but my dad didn't say anything. A few hours later, while everyone was distracted in the kitchen, my dad came up to me quietly and asked, "You want to check the attic with me again?" We grabbed the flashlight and pulled down the ladder. This time, I went up with him. The attic looked like it always had. Cardboard boxes labeled Xmas decor, old clothes, photos, some covered furniture and random junk. The insulation was visible in patches, and a single naked bulb hung from the ceiling. But there were two things that were off. The first was near the center of the attic, directly above where my bed would be. There, in the dust on the floor, were clear marks.
Lines where something heavy had been dragged repeatedly back and forth. The second thing was near the attic hatch itself. In the thick layer of dust around the opening, there were footprints. Not old, faded ones, fresh ones. They looked like bare feet, no shoe tread pattern, just the faint outlines of toes and heels. Several prints, all circling around the hatch area, like someone had been pacing there, looking down through the crack. My dad and I both stared at them. "You and I are the only ones who've come up here in years," he said quietly, "and we wore shoes." He followed the footprints as they moved from the center of the attic toward the far corner where some old furniture was stacked. There was an old wooden wardrobe pushed against the wall there, something my parents had inherited from my grandfather. The footprints stopped right in front of it. My dad shined the flashlight on the wardrobe. The doors were slightly ajar. He looked at me, then slowly pulled one of the doors open. Inside, instead of hanging clothes like I expected, there was a blanket spread out on the floor of the wardrobe, along with an empty soda bottle, a crumpled fast food bag, and a small pile of what looked like candy wrappers. Someone had been sleeping in there. There was also another object wedged into the corner of the wardrobe, a dirty red hat. The kind with white trim and a little fuzzy ball at the end. A Santa hat. My dad muttered, "What the hell?" under his breath. We looked around the attic again, trying to see if there was any obvious entry point. There was a small window at the far end of the attic, partially covered by boxes. When he moved the boxes aside, we saw it. One of the glass panes was cracked and pushed inward. and the old latch was broken. There were faint scratch marks on the wooden frame outside, like someone had climbed up and pried it open. Whoever had been up there was gone now. We called the police. They came, took pictures, and searched the attic and the house thoroughly. They found the same evidence we did: footprints, a makeshift sleeping area in the wardrobe, food trash. But no person, no direct identity. The officer said it was likely a squatter, or possibly even someone who had been moving from house to house, hiding in attics or basements. He suggested that maybe they'd entered a day or two before through the broken attic window, not realizing the house was occupied. But that doesn't explain the timing. The sounds I heard, the laughter, and Liam saying he saw Santa looking down from the attic hatch, all on Christmas Eve. For days after, I couldn't stop imagining it. Me sleeping in my childhood room, my 4-year-old nephew awake, believing in Santa, and some stranger, barefoot, crouched in the dark attic directly above us, dragging who knows what across the floor, pacing around the hatch, maybe even peeking through the slits, listening to our voices, laughing. My parents had the attic window property repaired and put a lock on the hatch. They also installed a security system. But I haven't stayed overnight there since. This year they asked if I'd come for Christmas again. I said I'd visit for the day. I just won't be there when the house gets quiet, the heater turns off, and the sounds from the attic are the only thing you can hear.